Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and your podcast co-host. And with me, as always, is my colleague, Matt Fleming, PRI's Communications Director. How are you, Matt?
Good, how are you?
Well, we'll see how far my voice will stretch this week, but we have a lot of interesting things in the news to talk about, and certainly dominating the discussion in Sacramento and nationally is what's going on with ICE in Minnesota. And, we're not law enforcement analysts. We're not going to be here to kind of second guess, well, I should have done this or I should have done that. We're sitting from the sidelines and making those kind of observations. But we can speak to the kind of the political and communication strategy or lack thereof behind what has been going on in Minnesota. And, it seems to me in watching this, Matt, it's kind of symptomatic of a lot of what the Trump administration does, right? Is you kind of trust your instinct, lean into what you want to do, but you don't really have a strategy, certainly in execution of what they want to do. And of course, on the political and communication side. And this is what happens when you kind of undertake a major initiative and you don't really have a lot of thought or planning behind it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's true, and it seems like both sides will say one side is the administration's immigration efforts, the other side is more liberal opponents to deportations. Both sides have embraced a strategy of being provocative, right? Now, I say all that overall, I don't think anybody deserves to die in police custody unless they really are doing something aggressive. I'm like you, where I don't, I've watched footage of it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know exactly how, what appropriate police procedure was and how it would play in court. Having said that, it certainly looks troubling. But it's the natural result of overly aggressive and provocative deportation efforts, and also overly aggressive protests. Again, I don't think the gentleman deserved to die, but these types of situations are what it seems like both sides are intent on hurtling towards.
Yes, we're being guided by, and certainly when you talk about Gavin Newsom and everything he does these days, it's all performative. It's all designed to stoke outrage. It's all designed to say, see what we told you about it. And it's on both sides of the issue. Looking at it from the communications perspective, it seemed very clear that the administration wanted to paint this whole thing as, these are Marxist terrorists who are interfering with law enforcement. And yeah, there's some bad actors for sure going on. And they have been, the entire time of this Minnesota debacle. But, I kind of communications 101, right? When something bad happens or something is happening in real time, you don't comment and you don't respond until you know what's happening. And it seemed like, this was a case of, telling the emperor he's wearing a nice suit. It's obvious we see with our eyes that what was going on in Minnesota isn't what administration officials were saying and doubling down on. And you really lose credibility, really kind of become a modern day Chicken Little, if you will, when you're not leveling with how it is.
You brought up two really good points. I mean, police and law enforcement agencies are famous for not giving out information during active investigations and right after incidents. Part of that is them wanting to control the message, but also part of that is them wanting to make sure they have good information, as you said, them wanting to make sure they don't possibly lead to a mistrial by giving out false information. And it seems like in this particular instance, very, very high-ranking Trump administration officials didn't really care about that. They put out something saying this guy was, he had a gun, which was true, but he didn't have a gun in his hand. He wasn't coming at them. And they said that they saved their lives. But again, we're not forensics experts. But by looking at the video, by the time there was any sort of like physical altercation with the gentleman, he had already been maced or pepper sprayed. and was already on the ground. And you can see an officer removing the gun from his waistband, the officer removing the gun from the gentleman's waistband, but before the shooting, and the guy is subdued on the ground. Now, there could be questions about what inside the scrum, what police are actually seeing. And I think that's going to determine whether the officer is guilty or not. But again, from the outside looking in, it certainly doesn't look good. Also, if we're just talking in terms of messaging, after Renee Good was shot and killed, a few weeks ago, you would think that there would be some type of reconciliation or cooling off period from the administration, right? Historically speaking, when something tragic happens, and independent of whatever you think of how Renee Good acted, it's tragic. Under normal circumstances, we would do something to try to take some of the pressure out of society and try to cool things off a bit. But the Trump administration just barreled forward, and this happened again. And fortunately, it seems like they're de-escalating now a bit, but hopefully they stick to that because it's just going to create more violence.
The irony, too, right, is that most people, I think, not people on the left, but I think most fair-minded observers would look at the Renee Good incident and say, well, she probably shouldn't have lost her life there, but she was not an innocent bystander. In this case that we've had over the weekend, there's that haunting image, right, of there's an officer with a gun to the back of the head of this fella. And it's the kind of thing, right, you see, you would expect in the times of Pol Pot to see something like that, right? Or in, a communist dictatorship, you would see them dealing with protesters and people who were contrarians in that way. And I think that was that may have been the moment in this incident where you say, we don't do that in the United States of America. You're also not winning on your communication strategy when basically your argument is, well, if we're doing it, you shouldn't protest it and you shouldn't come to a protest with a gun. And, you can argue the efficacy of going to a protest with a gun, but you immediately lost your most loyal supporters in the National Rifle Association, many of whom said, we go to protests all the time armed and there's never a problem. And I think if you're losing the NRA, you're really losing on communication strategy.
Sure. I am of the belief that if you are bringing a weapon to a already tense situation, you are escalating it, or at least running the risk of escalating it. Having said that, he, by all accounts, had a constitutional right to that gun. He had a concealed carry permit. He wasn't brandishing it. From a messaging perspective, yeah, I mean, you lost the NRA, which, anytime I see any sort of activist group buck what would be traditionally considered their side in favor of acting principled, I always applaud it. I think it's great that the NRA did that. Gun Owners of America did the same thing. Kudos to them for standing by their principles, even if, in this situation, Trump would normally be their ally. But it is just like you said, Tim, I mean, once you have somebody already subdued, it just seems inconceivable that this situation escalates so much that you end up shooting them in the back of the head or in the back or the neck or wherever the bullet went in. It reminds me of a few years ago where, do you remember when in Atlanta, the police officer came up on a gentleman who was in the driver's seat of his car in the drive-through of a McDonald's or something, and the guy was passed out? Do you remember that?
Yes, yes.
And the situation escalated to where the guy had gotten out of the car and got shot in the back by the cop. And I mean, like, again, we're not forensics experts. We're not experts in police training and appropriate procedure. But like, dude, if you walk up on someone who is passed out in their car drunk and you can't handle that situation without shooting someone in the back, there seems to be something wrong with this situation. I kind of feel the same way here. Like, I don't know if this guy was not showing his hands, which is when some of the analysis I heard from people who were talking about how the forensic experts would look at this. Were the officers able to see his hands? Was he providing a threat in that way? Did the person who took the gun from his waistband not, let everyone else know, or were they not aware that that had happened? All that's true. It's also possible that this guy had just been pepper sprayed and isn't really, totally with it, and he's kind of resisting, but he doesn't even really know what's happening. All that stuff is true, but in watching it, to not be able to get out of the situation without shooting someone just seems inconceivable.
So now we're, of course, moving from what's happening in Minnesota to the policy reaction. And you have kind of two reactions. You have a call from a lot of Democratic elected officials and activists to, quote, defund ICE, which I think, they haven't really learned anything from the defund the police movement of recent years. I don't think the American people are really there on that front. We're seeing in Congress, there's the debate over the next sort of temporary funding resolutions in Congress that may well be held up over funding for Homeland Security. Then you're seeing in Sacramento, there was, as we taped today on Tuesday the 27th, there was the vote earlier today on legislation by Senator Scott Wiener about, kind of legal exposure that federal agents may incur while conducting activities in California. And I think the question going forward, especially on these issues of funding, is, are Democrats going to take this moment where, because of this overreach, you have turned around dramatically immigration, what was one of the best issues for the president? Are you going to turn around this moment and snap defeat from the jaws of victory?
It just seems to be a overcorrecting and over ambitious reaction to say we don't want any funding for ICE because who else would conduct deportations? I mean, I suppose that there are a lot of people in the Democratic coalition who don't want people getting deported, right? So at least it's intellectually honest at that point. If you don't want deportations, sure, defund ICE, that's fine. But if you even want to pretend as though you think that people who are here illegally should be deported, defund ICE is an untenable position, and I don't think that's where most people in the country are. I think they want to see people who are here, immigration laws enforced. But I think that the vast majority of people, and this is probably what the president is seeing, the vast majority of people want something way less aggressive is what we're seeing here. And, ICE agents have it rough right now. That might not sound appealing to some people, but certainly they've been turned into public enemy number one. And that might be deserved in some instances, but the vast majority of ICE agents are just people with government jobs trying to enforce the law. And, they're not out there trying to, kill people, and they're not out there trying to act as like a paramilitary organization. They're just trying to do their job. And it's really sad that rhetoric has been weaponized against them. Having said that, supporters of ICE need to do a better job of having integrity and not making matters worse.
Join PRI February 19th, 2026 in Sacramento for our annual California Ideas in Action Conference. Every year, PRI brings together some of the top free market thinkers in the state and the country to talk about how market-based reforms can pave the way for more political balance in the state and address some of the state's nagging challenges. This year, we have some terrific speakers lined up, including one of California's top reformers, San Jose Mayor Matt Mann, as our keynote luncheon speaker. You'll also hear from chef and food entrepreneur and newly appointed Huntington Beach City Councilman Andrew Gruhl as our kickoff speaker. You'll also hear policy experts discuss how to address the state's ongoing insurance crisis, and you'll hear from some of California's top journalists and opinion writers about all things politics in 2026. So RSVP today at pacificresearch.org/events to guarantee your spot for probably the top free market conference in California every year, PRI's California Ideas in Action Conference, February 19th, 2026 at the Sutter Club. Go to pacificresearch.org/events to join us in Sacramento. Before we were arguing about what was going on in Minnesota, we were arguing about what was going on in Davos and by extension in Greenland. And we had, of course, the recent, the big international conference in Davos where all the global elite, lots of heads of state and the business elite gather every year in Davos to opine about the big challenges facing the world at the World Economic Forum. And, once again, Donald Trump was the star of the show. And a lot of the discussion, of course, was around this issue of the Trump administration's desire to purchase or annex Greenland one way or the other. And, in the latest example of the California way, who was there but our governor, Gavin Newsom? Now, I don't know why he was there. A governor of California wouldn't normally be at such a thing. And it seemed like, Matt, he was there basically literally thumbing his nose at the president from the back of the room and wanting to talk to any reporter or literally anyone who would talk to him. What was the point of Gavin Newsom going to Davos, and did he really get anything out of it or get out of it what he thought he did?
It really depends on who you ask. I mean, to me, it seemed like he was Governor Gadfly. He was just there begging for attention, thirsty for attention, as the kids would say. It was just desserts and very funny that he was not allowed into like the U.S. Area to do some interview. He overestimates his own abilities. California is an economic powerhouse. That's true. It's been an economic powerhouse since long, long ago. Ronald Reagan was bragging about how California was the fifth or sixth or seventh largest economy back in the 60s. Like, it's been going on for a really long time. If anything, most of what has made California's recent economic surge has almost nothing to do with Gavin Newsom. If anything, it's in spite of Gavin Newsom. And he has really no business being there. It's offensive for him to go to internationally and start criticizing the president, even if he might even have legitimate grievances with the president. But it's just sad to watch. And it was funny to watch him not get his 15 minutes of fame. Some reporters I've seen around here talked about how he got the attention he wanted. I just don't see how it played well with most people. I don't think he looked powerful. I think he looked weak. I think he looked like he was just begging for attention. And, maybe that's enough to kind of keep him consistently in the news this week. But I don't think it's going to ultimately, like, people aren't going to say, "Oh, I love the guy I saw begging for attention at Davos." I don't know. Maybe Tim, you have a different opinion of it, but it just seemed so silly and sad.
That's exactly right. It was really sad. He was begging for attention. And if you read the coverage, he literally talked to anybody who was there. And, when you think about, I made the kind of prediction at the first of the year, the governor would give the state of the state. And that's probably the last you would really see him during his tenure as governor of California. And I think this trip to Davos is evidence of that. He didn't even present his budget this year. He has a really kick the can down the road budget, kick the can to the next governor. Whoever the next governor is going to inherit a big mess in their inbox, certainly one related to the budget. And, imagine if you had a governor working full time on the fiscal challenges of the state. And as we know, the sooner you address fiscal problems, the exponential impact you have in reducing their severity. And so when you saw him just kind of in the back of the room in the corner, literally begging any reporter to talk to him, you just wonder, boy, do you need attention that much? And you also wonder, to what end? You're the governor of California. Can't you get an interview on any show? Do you really need to go over there and kind of look pathetic in the corner? And what exactly do you have to offer the people of Davos? If you read Shameless Self-Promotion, the California Left Coast Survivors Guide, you look at all the things, the California way that he advertises, that he tries to say is this is a model not only for the country but the world, but it's a model of higher energy costs for consumers, higher cost of living, lower quality of life, more government restrictions on your freedom in virtually every area, from what kind of business you can operate to what kind of car you can drive. And so it's not really something that people are looking for. So I think I agree with you, Matt, that I just look at the whole spectacle and really, say it's rather sad.
And it's, as you pointed out, it is yet one more instance of him doing anything but governing California. His ability to not do his job is unparalleled. I mean, it would make, the biggest slacker in college blush. It really is astounding what lengths he'll go to just to not govern California.
And I'm sure it is not the last of the performative stunts that we will see over the coming months. But, I think most Californians look at this spectacle certainly and say, gee, I think we could do a lot better. But also, again, I don't see, is one voter in America impressed by what they saw? Did that endear him to any primary voter in any early primary state? It also made you wonder, who really are you appealing to? I guess there's something to be the toast of the European elite, but how does that help you become the president of the United States if that is your goal? I guess George Soros's son was proud of what Newsom did, so maybe that helped him on the money front in that area. But I just don't see, boy, if I were them again, it's another example of Emperor, you're wearing a nice suit. You can't look at that week, I think, objectively and be proud of what you did.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I did find one person who loved what Newsom did. Anita Chibria with the LA Times wrote that Newsom is killing it in Davos. So he got one.
Hashtag killing it, I suppose, is the phrase of the day.
How excited are you though? One thing about Newsom is in certain instances he really seems like he's in his element. When he's doing his budget talks, which he didn't do this year, but there is something impressive about his ability to memorize numbers and do the whole thing off, not off the cuff. He's memorized it, but I mean do the whole thing without really having any notes. Famously it's known that he's dyslexic, so he doesn't use notes. So there are some times where he's really in his element. How excited are you to see him try to act like a normal person with the same blue coat, or maybe he takes the coat off, but he's wearing the white shirt and the blue tie and the hair slicked back in, a barbecue joint in South Carolina, or getting like some kind of like fried stick of butter or fried Oreo in Iowa in a diner or something. I just am really looking forward to him trying to act like he's a normal person with Iowa, South Carolina, and New Hampshire voters wearing what he wears, or wearing that Xenia jacket that he wore to the fires, or whatever. As much as I'm just really looking forward to the spectacle.
And I've always wanted to have one of those pork chops on a stick from the Iowa State Fair. We'll get back to next round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week. Finally, some interesting information came out today. This is a projection, and it kind of goes with Gavin Newsom and his California way. There was a forecast that came out from a professor at Carnegie Mellon University anticipating what will the congressional reapportionment be after the 2030 census. And obviously, we're making population projections and making a guess right now. But if you look at his forecast, California stands to lose 4 seats in Congress in the next reapportionment. That's the largest of any state. And primarily blue states are losers. Illinois is going to lose 2 states. New York is going to lose 2 seats. Pennsylvania is going to lose 1 seat. And primarily the red and purplish states are gaining seats. Florida would gain 4 seats. Texas would gain 4 seats. Arizona, Utah, Idaho would gain seats. And so looking at those numbers, you would think there would be shock and panic in the halls of power in Sacramento, because that is the surest sign of people voting with their feet, showing their displeasure with the California way, with the status quo policy agenda in Sacramento. Yet, it doesn't appear that the legislature is going to do anything but double down on the policies that are making our state an unappealing place to live or do business. Matt, how do you view these projections?
Yeah, it's the result of a couple things. There's the outmigration, which we have talked about before. California, if it wasn't for immigration, would have a declining population, but because there are more people coming in from other countries than there are people leaving the state, the population does continue to grow, albeit very slightly. What I always like to say is that the state is least popular amongst those who know it best. But there's also the declining birth rate, or actually, I don't know if it's declining at the moment, but it is one of the lowest birth rates in the country among states. So we're not producing new Californians. It should be an objective failure by state policymakers, but hashtag Newsom's killing it. According to him, everything's great, and if you have any other sort of point of view, it's just a right-wing conspiracy. Facts and data be damned. But I do think it will lower California's standing, certainly in Congress, by losing seats, and it will raise Texas and Florida's standing in Congress. And one bit of the analysis that I've seen, though, is that this is going to make it harder for Democrats to win a national election. I just wouldn't be so sure of that. Not everyone leaving California is Republican. So as you see in Texas, Texas is becoming bluer. Georgia is one of the seats that has it's historically been red, and is one of the states that's supposed to pick up seats, and that is largely turning blue. So, and the political party coalitions are changing. So I wouldn't count Democrats out in terms of winning a national election, but in terms of California, certainly it's an objective failure.
And of course, redistricting comes into play. And that was my first thought when I saw these numbers. Is this going to be the excuse that Democrats use to have another Prop 50 in 2030 or 2031? We're going to lose seats. We can't possibly do that. So we need to have more gerrymandering into the next decade, because it's one thing to apportion the seats. It's another thing to draw the new districts. And if Texas and Florida and these various states continue, down the gerrymandering path, the states may be becoming more purple at the top level, but you can sure draw districts that are going to elect red congressmen. So I think that will be interesting. If California is losing 4 seats, whatever happens, you can probably bet that those are going to be 4 Republican members losing their seats. Well, on that note, we want to thank everybody for joining us this week for Next Round. If you haven't already, we want to point your attention to our upcoming great event on February 19th here in Sacramento at the Sutter Club, our annual California Ideas in Action Conference. We have a terrific lineup. Our kickoff speaker is chef and entrepreneur and media personality and now Huntington Beach City Councilman Andrew Gruel. And our keynote speaker at the lunch is one of the most fascinating people in California politics today, one of our state's top reformers, San Jose Mayor Matt Mann. We hope you can join us. If you're able to, please go to pacificresearch.org/events and register today to secure your spot. Thanks to the generosity of our supporters, it's a free event. You just need to register to be able to come, and the free event includes something you don't normally get in politics, a free lunch. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us again next week for Next Round.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/PacificResearch1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.